Physical training, self-defense training, firearms training, situational awareness, and the warrior mindset. Welcome to the Condition 1 podcast. This is a podcast where we'll be talking about Welcome to the Condition 1 podcast. This is a podcast where we'll be talking about being ready. We'll also be speaking to victim survivors of physical encounters, how they dealt with the aftermath, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Today's episode is brought to you by CTG. CTG supplies defense and aviation industry with critical parts and materials designed to keep fleets and systems operational, ready, and safe. Check them out at ctgnow.com. On today's episode, I have Mr. Thomas Pecora. Tom Pecora has over 27 years of experience in working in the security field, 24 years working in the CIA. Tom retired from the CIA as a GS-15 senior security manager working in protective operations, counterterrorism, and security training, most of it operating in low-intensity conflict areas. Tom was chief of security in several countries where he was responsible for countrywide security programs, ensuring the safety and security of all personnel in high-threat environments. A seasoned protective operations veteran, Tom led teams protecting the CIA personnel and visiting VIPs to include presidents, vice presidents, as well as Senate and congressional delegations. He spent 3 years providing specialized protective operations training courses to foreign governments, protective services from Latin America, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Tom received the Intelligence Star, the CIA's second highest honor for valor, and a Career Intelligence Medal for service reflecting exceptional achievements. Tom has a Master's of Arts degree in Communications from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater and a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Communications from Marquette University. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome Mr. Tom Pecora to the podcast.
Thank you, John. Pleasure being here.
How are you?
Good. Weathering the fading of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. So, where are you now? Can you say?
I'm actually up in the Subic Bay area of the Philippines, where we used to have one of our largest naval bases. Mm-hmm. So I've just moved here. I had plans of moving here a year ago, kind of delayed by some type of event that happened over the last year. But
okay, all right. So you like it there in the Philippines, don't you?
Yes. I have a lot of friends here. I was posted here for 3 years, back in some pretty interesting times, 2001 to 2004. So made a lot of friends and did a lot of work.
Great. All right, Tom, let me ask you a question. You're a busy guy. You've got a very interesting background. I read your book. I've listened to some other podcasts that you were on. And I'm going to ask you a question that's probably common that you've been asked on different podcasts. But what is your normal morning routine when your feet hit the floor in the morning?
Oh, since I got here, I'm a little earlier rising than most times. I get up at about 7:30, a little after 7. Then I go and meet up with a couple of the old gents that inhabit a coffee shop right across from my hotel, and I listen to some wisdom from some people who've been around a long time, a lot longer than me. And then later in the morning, I hit the gym that's actually attached to this hotel, which is great. And then pretty much I start planning and working on the business parts of my day.
Okay, perfect. So if I'm correct, you grew up in Wisconsin, correct?
Yes, I did. Born and raised.
What was your childhood like growing up, all the way up through college?
Oh, we were in kind of an active area. We were partially rural, partially near the edge of the city. So we were able to go and run around in the woods and lots of fields. There were some farms nearby, but then we could get to the malls. Very active in terms of athletics. got into wrestling, and that really monopolized my time and efforts all through high school. And then when I went to school at Marquette University on a wrestling scholarship, so I wrestled all through college, Division I, and I was able to make it to the U.S. Division I national championships twice, competing against some of the best in the United States. So that was a lot of fun until I answered an ad in the newspaper after grad school for the CIA, and then I left Wisconsin, and pretty much haven't looked back since.
It was an ad in the newspaper.
Yes, an ad in the local newspaper.
In the local newspaper, okay. That's
1989.
Isn't that kind of odd? I mean, it may be odd today, but was it for back then in 1989?
Yes, it was. I wasn't quite sure how that all worked, but I put an application in, and then I got a phone call. I'd say it was about a little more than a month later, and I thought it was one of my buddies just to give me the razz. So I almost hung up on the guy. It's a good thing I didn't. Then I went through a long process to get in, background investigation, polygraph, and all, and ended up getting slotted in security, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Excellent. So it all started with an ad in the newspaper, and that's how the CIA came into your life. That's amazing. That's amazing. When you were selected for service with the CIA, you went through a program called the Special Protective Operators Course in D.C. Can you tell us about that experience in that training?
Yes, that was an interesting time. I was doing background investigations on the West Coast, and to tell you the truth, I was a little bit disappointed with that part of the job. It was my first assignment, and to tell you the truth, it's very boring. Interviewing people and the individuals I was doing backgrounds on, they were not exciting people. They were engineers, nice people, but it was pretty boring. And I thought, wow, is this what my career is going to be? And then an opportunity popped up where they asked for volunteers to enter a training program for a protective operations group they were forming to protect our people in the overseas environment. So I jumped into that, and it was fascinating. It was like a whole other world. And from that moment on, I was in and out of that protective operations unit throughout my career. And then I managed individuals from that group when I was in the war zones as the head of security.
Okay. So what was your, after the schooling, your first assignment? Where was your first assignment?
My first assignment was in Mogadishu, Somalia, in 1993. I was there for about 50 days, and I left just before Black Hawk Down.
Okay, so while you were there, when you entered into that area, what was the climate like? I mean, what was it like when you arrived?
Extremely hostile.
Hostile?
Yeah, extremely hostile. We came in. I was in one of the first teams. We were Team 9, and we rotated in, and right away we were faced with a lot of hostility. Every movement was a potential attack. We had to vary our routes. Pretty much every movement had to be planned to ensure that we were not running any of the routes in duplicate. And also we had to factor in threat intelligence that we would get on different roads that they had mined. The bad guys would put anti-tank mines in the potholes, and they were talking on two-way radios, and our intercept people were listening in, and they would tell us, "Oh, can't take this specific road now; they've got it mined." So we would have to start. We'd always be altering our routes. So, near the end of my tour, it got so bad that pretty much nobody else was on the road except for us and some of the media, and they weren't doing so well. They were getting killed.
Yeah. Okay. So when you were out running these routes, who assisted you in this? Any assistance from?
Oh, Well, we were a four man team, and we were providing security for our agency personnel who were out collecting. So they would go out and meet their assets, and we would and everything we did was on a low profile protection mode. That was our specialty. Unlike some of the bigger details where they'd run around with the big SUVs and like 3-car motorcades, we were 2-car motorcade, as low a profile as possible. Sometimes multiple car lengths apart, anything to disguise our activities. And so we were moving around the city, mainly in the daytime. Nighttime was extremely dangerous. We did very limited nighttime movements.
Okay. Getting off the aircraft into Mogadishu, and you start your working, doing your operations. Reflecting back on that, do you feel that the training that you picked up from the school that you had gone to, was that beneficial for you? When you stepped off, did you feel, okay, I've had this schooling, I'm ready to go, I know what's going on? Or like most, even in law enforcement, people go to the police academy, and then when they get out, it's like, okay, now what do I do? And it's a lot of OJT, right? So
Yeah.
did the same thing happen with you and your guys?
Absolutely, because the environments were different places have very different environments, and what you're relying on, at least for us, was knowledge gleaned from the other teams. So we were Team 9. We were utilizing all the accumulated data that teams 1 through 8 gathered. So we would, like, the roads didn't have, there were no real maps of those roads. And if you remember from the Black Hawk Down incident, the Rangers got caught out in the city, and they didn't know where they were because they had no accurate maps. So we had to learn the routes and then pass that knowledge on. So there was a lot of required OJT for the previous team to indoctrinate the next team on the roads, and then also the atmospherics, the activities, the tactics and techniques used by the enemy. Now, there were certain parts of the training that were absolutely spot on, and I can tell you I'm alive now because of them, because we were hit with an ambush, and the techniques that were used by the driver, the things that we were doing to mitigate afterwards and to get to safety and save the life of our protectee, all that was based on our training.
Okay. In the book, you talk about an incident that took place where I believe it was an ambush, if I remember correctly. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. What happened was we ended up going up into North Mogadishu, and we took a route we had never taken before because the bad guys had figured out the routes we were taking up to North Mo. Pretty much all of them except for one, and you can't take the same road back and forth. It's just too dangerous. They'll pick up on it. And the interesting part is the bad guy that we were tracking, that we were going after, who was after us, was a former asset. And his name is Mohammed Farid Adid, and he was on the UN's wanted list in Mogadishu. And what we ended up took a route we hadn't taken in 6 months, and we did an overflight the day before with the Black Hawk to look at atmospherics, to see the routes, to make sure that we had a good idea how we were going to navigate, and what were the activities in the area. Unfortunately, the next day, activities had dramatically changed, and we got caught up in something that turned out it was an ambush on a Nigerian checkpoint, and we drove right into kind of the tail end of it. They didn't know we were coming, and we didn't know they were there.
Okay, that was the next question I was going to ask you. Was this ambush set up because they knew you were coming, or was it somebody else that they were hitting, and you just happened to show up?
They were hitting. Yeah, wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah.
But in those environments, that's not unusual. Or at this point, what had happened was the Italians had given up a checkpoint to the Nigerian UN contingent. Unfortunately, they didn't tell the Nigerians that they had been paying off the Somalis to leave them be. So the Nigerians weren't paying. So the Somali militia attacked the Nigerians. They killed them. They killed, I think, it was 9. They brutalized a few. They actually, some of this was on national TV. There were some reporters who caught part of this later on in that day. And what happened was we drove into the kind of the tail end of their ambush site, but we luckily saw enough unusual circumstances and then made an immediate U-turn decision, which kept us from going what we call on the X, being right at the point that they want to trigger the ambush. So we were just outside that. So when they started firing on us, we weren't getting maximum firepower.
Okay, I see. So how did you, through your training, how did you escape that?
A combination of a couple different skill sets that you're working on. You want to avoid incidents. So you're utilizing protective intelligence. So you're going to read all the reporting on the tactics and techniques of your enemy. You want to know where they're operating. You want to know how they're operating. And you want to know what the strengths and weaknesses of these enemies in specific areas of the city so that you can avoid them. In this case, we were following old intelligence. In other words, that area had not been really studied for a while because we weren't moving through it, and some of our intelligence was off. The second level is atmospherics in terms of our situational awareness. We were looking at the environment the day before and going an overflight with a Black Hawk helicopter and picking up very specific areas that we were vulnerable. For example, when we were turning from one road to another, when we were going through a specific checkpoint, one of the Italian checkpoints, we were going through a market area. So we were looking to try to get as much information about those sites. Then the day of the movement, we started to pick up on signs that things were not quite right. There were burning tires. There was an overturned vehicle. When we drove through a market area, all the people were looking in one direction, and they were very surprised to see us behind them moving through. So we were picking up on all this information. And then another aspect of this is looking for an attack signature. So you're looking for specific signs that they're lining up an attack. For example, is there a much more tire smoke in one area? Are you not able to see far enough down the road? Are they blocking some of the road so that you are channeled? And these are all things that actually happen to us. And then the final thing that you're trying to do, which is not the ideal, but it's part of the training, which is when you're approaching something that looks suspicious, you must raise your awareness level and prevent surprise. So as we drove into a specific area of that, after that market, we saw there was a lot of smoke. We saw that the road was partially blocked, so we were channeled. And then the final straw was a little gust of wind blew some of the smoke away from about 2 feet off the ground. And we were able to see just far enough ahead that they had pulled a Connex box or a freight container. Those big metal containers that they put on the ships. They had dragged one across the street and completely blocked the road. Wow. So we were able to immediately implement our immediate action plans. That's our tactics that we're trained to do when we feel that we are under attack. And in this case, we were able to do an immediate U-turn, and we're moving in the reverse direction by the time the bad guys started to open up on us with their AK-47s.
Okay. Is this where your CIA Intelligence Star Medal came in?
Yes. Our team was awarded this Intelligence Star for saving the life of our protectee. We got him to a U.S. Army hospital in time. He was pretty much bled out. I mean, they had to replace almost his entire body of blood. I think it was 4 units.
Wow.
And do some emergency surgery. So, but we got him there in time, saved his life. So, yeah, it was an incredible time. This was just the prelude before the Black Hawk Down incident, and we were also supporting Delta Force and their search for Farah Aidid.
Okay, all right. So something I always thought was interesting was the burning of the tires. Why do they do that?
We weren't, to tell you the truth, at the time, we were not sure. There were a couple of different things we're thinking that it was some type of signaling to obscure their movements, because we're using a lot of ISR, which is basically air platforms to observe the area. So we have very high flying planes, and they're watching what's going on. So if they can obscure their activities with smoke, they can hide what they're doing. Those were some of the reasons. We found out later there was also a sign that they were gathering people to take action. And we found that out actually through the book written on Black Hawk Down by Mark Bowden.
I see. Okay, perfect. So there's a quote out there from a Greek poet, Archilochus. He's quoted in saying, "We don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training." Through your experiences and training throughout your years with the CIA and other areas of your life, do you believe this to be true?
Absolutely. The training that you embrace, that you practice until you bring it to what the level of unconscious competency. That's the highest level you can get. Those are the things that will carry you through the fight, because you're able to do certain activities without clogging up your conscious mind, and you're able to do to be basically thinking on your feet while you're still operating. If you don't have some of those skills incorporated into almost like your muscle memory, your unconscious competence level, you're going to use up a lot of your brain power doing the activities. It's not ideal, but it's still worthy. When you get into a situation where you haven't trained, or your training is poorly done, or it's old, it's not recent, or it's not really relevant, then you end up in some situations where you're not quite competent, and that really comes to haunt you. And what I've found in 2 areas: one, your confidence level is not good, and the second part is you're going to get in a situation where your brain is going to start looking for other solutions, and that increases your stress. It raises your blood pressure. It starts to cause all kinds of things that move you to what we call, in the awareness level, in condition black, which is closer to panic.
Right.
And if you get to the point where you start to panic, it's only by luck that you really survive.
Yes. And we talked about that a lot in law enforcement as one of the situational awareness areas, right? And we use the color codes, and the condition black, or color code black, was never really spoken about that much. You know, it was always white, yellow, orange, red, and then black was kind of just shifted off to the side, and it gives me that much more. I like to talk about that area when I talk to people about situational awareness, just to spike them a little bit more to train harder. So are you still training today, doing any training at all today since you've been retired?
Yes, I'm right now. My main focus is on personal safety training for a wider audience, because it's something that I ended up getting into near the end of the last half of my career, because we started putting people that were not what you would call operators out into the war zones. So we're putting logistical people and administrative people in areas where it was a lot more dangerous, and they didn't have any training. So we had to kind of refigure how we're going to train them up for these hostile environments. And so what I've done since I retired was really work on how do we apply that for the civilian world, and also apply some of the lessons we've learned with all this war zone activity. How do we keep safe? What are some things that really work across all these different environments? And that's where situational awareness is a huge factor for us. We really believe that avoidance is the only way to win. Really, a fight avoided is a fight won.
Absolutely.
So I got involved in situational awareness very, very specifically because it's the first step in almost all personal safety. It's an integral part of anything you do in that realm, whether it's moving into the self-defense area, unarmed combat or armed combat. All that it's a baseline. It's your concrete foundation.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that also. I try to push situational awareness as much as possible because, and you said it, if I can avoid it, if I see it, I can change my direction of travel, avoid it, and I win. I win. So, yeah, it's 100%. In today's world, with your background, everything you've done, what you're doing today, what advice would you give to the military, law enforcement, and the civilian world in reference to training for today's environment? And start off with mindset.
Oh, mindset is number one. It's the real. I mean, let's go back to something kind of funny, but realistic. As we were moving through time, humans, from the caveman days all the way up, we weren't winning the battle per se against the threats we had in the environment. The dangerous animals, et cetera. We weren't beating them on a one-to-one basis. They've got bigger claws. They've got sharper teeth. We were beating them with our mind. So that's our strength. And part of that is we have the ability to read the terrain and use it, put it into context, and then use it to be predictive. In other words, we can see the future. That's what animals can't do.
Right.
And allows us to develop tactics and techniques that have beaten our adversaries and made us the top of the food chain. And the mindset part that we have to be careful of now that we're in the civilized realm, in the 21st century, is a tendency to get too comfortable, to be complacent, and to get a mindset of denial, which is one of the most dangerous things we can do. If you really somehow in the back of your mind do not believe that something bad could happen to you, you sabotage yourself, and you're going to make it extremely difficult when you face a threat to adequately respond.
Absolutely.
Because your brain is going to have to deal with that.
Yes, and I hear that almost every day. I hear that almost every day where I live. I've had people ask me, "Why do you do what you do?" Nothing. We live in a nice community. Nothing's ever going to happen here. And it's like my head starts to hurt. And because I know better. Because of what I've done, and it's just, pull your head out of the sand, have your head on a swivel, be aware, and have a plan.
Yes. and have a plan. And hope is not a plan.
Exactly.
Yes. It's so, yeah, you may not ever run into something like that, but if you don't have a mindset that it's a possibility, and that you, it's like if you rent a car and you don't check the trunk to see if there's a spare tire in it. Okay, how many times may you get away with driving that rental car and never having a flat tire? But all in that one time,
yeah,
you have the flat tire, you open up the trunk and there's no spare. At that point, this could be a real serious situation. You might be driving a loved one to the hospital. Something is going on.
Sure.
One of the things I found with this mindset is even people who are in dangerous areas, who have had training, but haven't really focused their core belief system on the denial factor. Mm-hmm. I work with people in the war zones where I'd be talking to them and I'm like, they've been out here for 6 months and they really don't believe anything can happen. They in their movie, the hero never gets hurt. Mm. And wow, when something bad happens, they're not going to be ready.
Yeah. It's hard to catch up on something like that. You know, when something happens, it's happening, right? And it's just difficult to try to get ahead of it when it's happening, unless you have that mindset and that plan, right?
And there's been a lot of study in this area. One interesting aspect was done. Well, a little mini study was done in a concentration camp by Dr. Viktor Frankl. He was a concentration camp in prisoner, and what he did to keep himself going was he was watching and observing the other prisoners and determining, like, based on what was going on, who were the most likely ones to survive, who was surviving and who wasn't, and what were the possible reasons for that. And one of the things he came up with, Man's Search for Meaning is the name of his book on this. He found that people who had a reason to live, that they had concrete things that they were focused on, and that they were determined to survive, regardless of the circumstance, those people had a tendency to live. And it wasn't something whether they were big or strong. That core belief got them through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a lot of people don't understand that. They don't know that. You know, I think sometimes it's human nature, just that when we're put under pressure, that we just want to settle down and relax ourselves. You know, when we do that in a bad situation, bad things are going to happen to us. You know? Yes,
and you mentioned that when it happens, there's really not a lot of time. You're not going to be able to think your way through some of this stuff. And part of that thinking through is, deciding that you're not going to be a victim, that you have a reason to live, that if you face that threat, part of your brain goes, I thought this might happen.
Right.
And I'm quoting now Colonel Jeff Cooper in his famous lecture on the color codes.
Right.
He says that little bit of mental edge gives you such a positive boost in one of the worst situations, because now you were mentally prepared, and you're now you can implement some of the things you talked about before, which was have a plan.
Right. And I talk to people about that, on having a plan, and it's based on a self-defense world and bad things happening to them. But I started out with, how many here are firearm owners? And I get a raise of hands, and I said, and where do you keep the firearm? And it's pretty common. People keep, their firearm in their nightstand, and I say, okay, well, where do you keep your fire extinguisher? And how many of you live in a 2-story home? And I'll get a show of hands. And I'll ask the same thing about the firearm, and I'll say, okay, where you get at 3 o'clock in the morning, you get up, you smell something burning, you get up, your feet hit the floor, it's hot, you're on the second floor of your home. How are you getting out? Do you have children? Do you have toddlers? How are you getting them out? Where's your fire extinguisher? You know, how are you getting out the window? If you have to go out the window, how are you going to get out? You know, and I've had some good answers from people, you know, trying to stir their thoughts as to how to do this. You know, we talk about fire extinguishers. We talk about fire ladders, you know, and how to hook them up, you know, and at least take them out of the box and read the directions, you know, and understand how that
before you
works.
need them.
Yeah, you know, and I spoke to one lady. She says, yeah, I have a fire ladder. And I was like, that's fantastic. You know, I said, where do you keep it? And, you know, she goes, and she hits herself in the head like a V8. I could have had a V8 type incident. And it was like, it's in my garage. And I'm like, yeah, it's not going to do you any good in the garage, is it? You know? So I said, you have to have a plan. I said, if you start with basic home safety, then you can take that same thought pattern and move it into your personal safety when you're out and about, you know, and with adding in situational awareness and mindset. So that's great, man. I'm glad to hear you talking about that because, you know, I've been talking about it for a long time. And it just, for me, it gives that verification, especially coming from you and your background and things that you've been involved in, that it's the right path. So when we talk about the CIA and people hear those 3 letters, we think of, you know, the peeking around the corner spy, you know, the cloak and dagger type stuff. But is it all that, or is it not? James Bond.
It's a big organization, and the majority of people don't do that kind of work.
Okay.
In fact, it's probably like, you know, in terms of the overseas element, it's only maybe 25% of the whole population. Mm-hmm. And then of that 25% that's overseas, only a small portion of them are actually out involved in clandestine activities. I was lucky enough to kind of bridge a bunch of different areas and work those. The majority of people don't. I mean, there are jobs. We have truck drivers. We have HR specialists. We have logistical people. Their jobs are not much different than Amazon.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's funny, but it's true. In fact, we all laugh about that. You know, there's a lot of jobs where if you didn't have the badge, you didn't have the access control, it would be just about the same.
Wow. That's amazing.
Because it's a big organization.
Sure.
Yeah, but
sure.
But when you get into the where the kind of rubber meets the road,
right,
it's a different animal.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm sure there's things out there that guys and gals operating in places that most people have never heard of. They'll never know.
24/7.
They'll never
365
know. Exactly.
days a year, places that and we love our military, but they're not even there. And some of these places, there's no rescue.
Yeah, that's amazing. Brave people. Tom, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast and giving us a peek into your life and your life in the CIA. It's very educational for me. This is not the first time we've spoke, but it's always very interesting talking to you, you know, and your book. If our listeners want to read about you, read about your events in the CIA, pick up Guardian, Life in the Crosshairs of the CIA's War on Terror by Thomas Pecora. It's a great book, and you could get that on Amazon and at your bookstores. Tom, thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it.